conversation is going to kick up in this legislative session. The agency has to write a report about what should or should not be confidential from a nutrient management plan perspective. And so, you know, from just me as a science person looking at this and seeing how much valuable data is actually in one of those plans, if it were protected, I think we'd be able to get more of that data and then report that back out to the world in an aggregated view so that you could see where there is more cover cropping or more rotations, et cetera. And so that's a conversation. The challenge is obviously there's another side of confidentiality, which is the side of what are you hiding? Why won't you share that information? And why do you want it to be confidential? And so that is something that's going to play out this session of should it or should it not be? And if it is, how do we manage it? And if it's not, what do we require to become a public document as far as once it hits in our doors, whether electronic or not, physical, it becomes a public document. And so that's sort of an interface we're at right now, because for honestly, from the ag's perspective, if they want to account, and I really think they should, for all the good things they're doing, that is the best way electronically to gather a significant amount of information.
And from the advocacy perspective, those of us in the public trust resource worlds, air and water, the way that we have held those people impacting those public trust resources is in fact through permits, through stated public documents of activities and or outcomes that are required under the terms of those permits. I mean, I've spent my life in FERC permit hearings and you know, reviewing discharge permits, and then when there's a violation or I hear from one of my volunteers at the community level that something's amiss, then I know to go back to the permit and look at the conditions that apply in that permit situation. So there's an expectation out there in the advocacy community, and that's where a lot of the pressure is coming to the ag agency. Having been part of these ongoing conversations, and I keep saying it for 29 years, you know, I understand that there's a bit of a different perspective in terms of the ag community, because this is not a business. This is not a direct discharge. It is a discharge and affects the quality and compliance of the waters of the state, but it has a different characteristic about it that TransCanada, in applying for relicensing of 3 hydro dams on the main stem Connecticut River, does not have. And I hope I'm being somewhat articulate so you understand that there's a history of using permits, and in this case a nutrient management plan basically becomes the permit in terms of nutrients and how they're managed on the land, of being open and being the tool that as an advocate you use to assure compliance. So we ask a lot of our agencies, seldom do we ask easy things.
I think this will be this discussion will be a good segue into the session tomorrow morning regarding sort of the use of information. So we use information to report results, but we're also using information to identify problem areas and non-compliant and compliant. You know, to acknowledge, next door they're talking about farmers who go above and beyond. We need information for that too. So it's very interesting discussion that you just added. So challenges ahead, and then Hilary, I'm going to give you the last word. You can talk for 10 minutes. Just what are the challenges ahead that you see right now and where we are with the process?
My biggest challenge is to quit the legislature raiding the Clean Water Fund.
I think it's one of getting information to people in a format that's accessible to ensure their cooperation. Ultimately, most of what we're talking about is changes in individual behavior. And so you can pass all the laws you want, but if people don't follow through, we're no better off than we were before, and probably just end up with a lot of frustrated people. So getting good education and outreach and the tools to the folks that need them to be able to do the implementation is going to be our ongoing challenge.
And I'll second the communications piece. I mean, we definitely got people out of the woodwork, and how do we connect with them is not something that, you know, they're not on social media, they're not always attending meetings. So that communication and the telephone conversation and how it comes out the other end, I think is something definitely I've seen gone wrong. And the other thing I'll say, I don't know if I should, but more of this work has created more work for the staff, and for us, our staff are overburdened, and I worry about burnout for new people, and I worry about, you know, sustainability of keeping people and keeping these relationships with all the partners on the ground. Unfortunately, you know, we needed more people to do the work, but somehow more work created more work. And so looking at efficiencies certainly, but, you know, big things for us, for instance, you know, the outside players that you can't consider, or you don't consider when you start budgeting for this stuff, are, you know, when Vermont Law School camps out for several months in your office looking through all of your records, and you have to assist them. Like that's the kind of stuff that can take an entire FTE out of play for many of these things, or audits of programs, stuff like that. So there's all this stuff that goes on, but again, because there's a bigger eye on all of this, it's bringing more people into our door saying we want to look inside and see what's going on, which I didn't anticipate when thinking about what resources we need to be able to do this job.
So I guess I would say uncertainty from the federal level, where we aren't sure if our funding is going to be coming and how those programs are going to be affected, to uncertainty at the local level, all of the towns and the farms and the landowners who are sometimes getting misinformation from their neighbors, and so really needing to get out and sort of not only address what's really happening, but also addressing what isn't really happening that's sort of being misspread.
And I'm going to add willingness to pay. I'm concerned about individuals. You know, there's both what can you do to protect water quality, and are you willing to pay for what it costs to do. So, okay, the last question goes to Hilary. How's this whole process looking from the grassroots level?
Okay, so I'll just give a quick overview, very quick and brief, about the work that the conservation districts are doing and the work that's going on sort of on the ground, boots on the ground locally. With towns, some conservation districts are doing back road assessments and implementing projects with their town road commissioners and road crews. We have a lot of stormwater assessments in progress right now, and both implementing and also gearing up to implement more projects. There's some funding available to implement these sort of capital projects that have been discussed, a little bit less funding available to help coordinate the projects. There's also been some flood resiliency planning that's gone on locally with some of the conservation districts, and that has sort of indirectly led to some water quality projects becoming sort of on-the-ground projects, and allowed for the districts to build support within communities for these projects. With the farms, we've been doing a lot of outreach and site visits, assisting with activities related to nutrient management planning, some livestock exclusion and other water quality improvement practice installation. And also some of the districts have equipment rentals, so we work on, we may have no-till drills or aerators that people use for conservation tillage and cover crop installation, things like that. With individuals, usually I get calls from people who have stream bank erosion issues near their homes or near something that they want to protect, so a lot of outreach about buffers and stream stability. I also work on individual properties with like stormwater projects, and a lot of the conservation districts are doing a lot of tree plantings, lakeshore tree plantings and along streams. We also have skidder bridge rental programs, so we're working with local loggers trying to protect streams during logging projects. I think the uncertainty that I really heard about on the ground, you know, working with towns, was to sort of wait for the municipal, sort of the roads permit that you've heard about today. I think that the road commissioners are sort of always, you know, people in town have different ideas about how they want their roads managed, and some mostly for travel, not necessarily for water quality, but they're sort of a lot of pressure on the road commissioners to do a good job and to keep the town roads maintained. And they've been sort of waiting for this permit and not really knowing what it was going to look like, and really wanting to make sure that they could do a good job, but not sort of knowing how to gear up to deal with this permit. So I've heard a lot of concern from towns about that. And I know A&R had somebody, Jim Ryan, who goes and works with towns sort of one-on-one, works with the road commissioners to try and prepare them for this and to spread information. And then that's been really great. I think for the farms, it's interesting because I was listening to Laura earlier, and I have what I'm going to say now, and I think it reflects a little bit this attitude shift that we've seen. So I think when I go out on farms, I don't necessarily hear from the individual farmer, I'm unhappy, but I hear farmers are unhappy. You know, all the other farmers, they're unhappy, and they don't like sort of being managed from the government. You know, they don't like having their activities on their private lands managed by the government. And I think that in the beginning, a few years ago, we saw, as it became more clear that Vermont was going to pass clean water legislation, we were going to need to make some changes, and that the farmers were really going to need to be involved. We saw some increased outreach to the districts and probably to NRCS as well. And people were implementing practices, and they were much more open to having people on their farm looking at their lands and looking at what might be sort of potential water quality projects. And I think we got pretty good participation in the statewide these RAP, these required ag practices meetings. We heard a lot of feedback that people were happy that we had held meetings. We had a couple of local ones in our area down in southern Vermont that were quite large. It got a little rowdy, and people said, you know, we're really glad that Laura and Marley and the people that were at these meetings could sort of take that, because we really felt that we were able to get our viewpoints and our opinions out. But then there was a little suspicion maybe that nobody was taking those opinions and using them to change or to form the rules. Although I think that actually did happen to quite a large extent. I'm not sure how much follow-up there then was on the part of the farmers to figure out sort of exactly where their comments had fit in. Although there was some good dialogue, certainly. But after the passage of the Clean Water Act and after the RAPs came out officially, what we've noticed in our area is that what we're sort of saying is that the farmers are laying low. We aren't hearing from them as much. And when we do go talk to them, they have this sense that if they join our program, it's going to be very public now, and everybody's going to want to know what's going on. Whereas before, maybe there was a little more anonymity. And that if they can just sort of stay under the radar, maybe nobody will come, and maybe an inspector won't come to their farm. So I think we have a good opportunity, especially the people that are sort of on the ground going door to door, both the conservation districts, but the inspectors also, to have that conversation and to really encourage people that now's the time to make changes. You don't want to get a letter from the state saying you have to make a change. You want to already be implementing that change on your farm. It's much more beneficial to do it that way. But I think it's going to be harder. I think we're going to have to go, and we're finding that we're having to go door to door and really make make the effort of knocking on someone's door and having that conversation, that sending out the postcards and the emails isn't working anymore, or isn't working right now. And I think individually, working with individual landowners, we're just this sort of having the stability of our programs to get general information out to individual landowners. I have a couple of lakes in my area, so we have some people coming in for summer use and recreational use on the lakes. But just to increase the understanding and the involvement of people who might own an acre or a quarter of an acre, but trying to educate them about the practices that they can implement in their own backyards. And I think the Lake Champlain Basin Program and Becky Tharp and some of the Lake Champlain Sea Grant conservation districts, a lot of people have been really trying to do that. There have been a lot of informational meetings at the lake annual meetings, the sort of homeowner association annual meetings, and I think we need to keep that up as we move forward. I think that was it, just encouraging land management sort of by everybody, the sort of all-in concept that incorporates water quality considerations into land management as we move forward.
Thank you very much. So before you sneak out and go for coffee, David, since you're skipping the dinner cruise, I have to embarrass you by giving you an award in this session as an expression of appreciation for all the work you've done for clean water in Vermont. and our natural resources.
Thank you.